Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Even as the fast day of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, rapidly approaches, our calendar of Torah readings thrusts us not into the nightmare of loss and destruction of the ancient temples, but rather into the need for us to begin to understand Moses. Not merely how the Torah text would understand Moses, not merely as the Talmudic and Midrashic materials would understand him, but how we must understand Moses, reclaim Moses in our own day. Our Sedra, of course, D'varim, Deuteronomy 1:1 and following. Sounds wrong on the face of it, doesn't it? After all, Moses is Moses, right? As he was in the Torah, so was he throughout the past 3,000 years. Moses floating on the Nile in a basket made of reeds. Moses growing up in a household of privilege. Moses fleeing his own rage and trying to establish a life for himself far away from his Egyptian troubles. A bush that burned, a call to return. Moses with Pharaoh, Moses standing at the shores of the Red Sea, Moses at Sinai, Moses and the golden calf, Moses hitting that rock. 40 years of desert wandering, and finally that devastated Moses, who could not get God to allow him to complete the singular goal of his 120-year life. One Moses. The narrative of Moses found in the Torah is not some early effort to write a definitive sacred biography. Rather, it is a narrative woven together over centuries by sages and scholars and scribes, by editors and writers, seeking to create an image of the founder of the Jewish people, an image which could guide us and inspire us. This Moses met the needs of the Jewish people up until the period of the Second Temple. But as our needs changed, so did Moses change. The Torah refers to Moses as the greatest of all prophets. As it states in Deuteronomy, there has never arisen in Israel a prophet like unto Moses who knew God face to face. But by the end of the Second Temple period, we needed not a prophet, but a teacher, one who would validate and teach sacred texts to our people. Moshe Nevi'enu, Moses, our prophet, thus gives way to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our rabbi. Now we find stories about how Moses was comforted confronting his death by the knowledge that future generations would declare that their legal decisions would be Torah mi Moshe mi Sinai, all based upon Mosaic instruction. Left Moses feeling good. Now we have stories about how Moses at Mount Sinai received not just the Torah, the written law, but the oral law as well. Mishnah, Torah, subsequent responsa, all flowed from the teachings of Moses. You see, the rabbis needed Moses to be one of their peers, to be a teacher and interpreter of Torah. They didn't need a leader through the wilderness. To put it directly, the rabbis needed Moses to validate and secure rabbinic leadership of our people following the destruction of the Second Temple. So what they needed, they then created. And for most people, it is just about impossible today to grasp who Moses was became a function of what our people needed. There's a more modern example of this derived from the wording on the tomb of Moses Maimonides, Rambam. The epitaph on that tomb reads, "From Moses to Moses." Simple. That epitaph was subsequently reworked by the leaders of the Jewish Enlightenment centuries later to read, "From Moses to Moses to Moses," meaning from the biblical Moses to the 12th century philosopher Moses Maimonides to Moses Mendelssohn, who in the 18th century combined Judaism with efforts to bring Judaism into agreement with rationalism, the thought of modern Europe. So Moses the prophet became Moses the rabbi, who became Moses the philosopher, without a single word of the Torah being changed. So remember, this week's Sedra, and thus the entire book of Deuteronomy, begins, Ele D'varim. These are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan. Moses spoke these words. Fine. But which Moses was it? It's not all that clear. I recently read a fascinating study by Bluma Goldstein, published by the Harvard University Press, entitled Reinscribing Moses. Title. Goldstein examined the image of Moses as constructed by 4 German Jewish intellectuals: Heine, Kafka, Freud, and Schoenberg, who were passionately interested in being assimilated and being accepted into the German intellectual mainstream. For each of them, Moses was the key. We find it in Heine's Confessions, in Kafka's diaries, in Freud's Moses and Monotheism, and in Schoenberg's unfinished opera, Moses and Aaron. For each of them, Moses not only had to be held up, but he had to be de-Judaized as well. Imagine that. Needing a de-Judaized Moses so they could gain access to the modern world. Heine needed a Moses who was a socialist and a great artist. Kafka saw the resemblance between Moses and writers who sought to lead the people to a higher existence. Freud needed a revolutionary bringing about the people's liberation. Schoenberg saw Moses as struggling to find the words and images needed to deliver a spiritual message. Remember, in all of this, Moses never changes, and the text of Deuteronomy never changes. He is an unchanging single figure on an unchanging parchment scroll. But despite that, the Moses we need in every generation continues to change as we struggle not only with our legacy, but with our own search for meaning in our world. So Goldstein asks, is Moses the quintessential diaspora Jew? Is Moses a liberator and an unassimilable Jew? Is Moses both someone who reshaped our society and our communities, Mrs. Kafka, while all the while remaining an isolated figure? Let me just point out These questions are the very same questions that assailed many 19th and 20th century German Jewish thinkers, so they made them Moses's questions. So as we begin the fifth and final book of the Torah today, we ask, how do we view and understand Moses? What do we need today to give us the language, the metaphors, the images to connect our personal yearnings, our ambitions for our society, our concern about the directions in which our world currently is lurching? What are we looking for? Probably not Moses the lawgiver. Probably not Moses the rabbi. Probably not Moses the philosopher. Then what? Maybe Moses, who would not allow the masses to absolve themselves of personal responsibility for what government and organizations were doing all around them. Maybe Moses, who spoke of love between God and us, ourselves, our people, ourselves, and all humankind. Maybe Moses, who spoke truth to power. Maybe Moses, who spoke of environmental concerns. Maybe Moses, who prized truth and integrity in our conversations. Our Sedra, our book begins, Ele HaDvarim. These are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan. Who was that Moses? Have a wonderful Shabbat. See you next week.